They say a king's greatest weakness is the woman he can't afford to lose. But what happens when he chooses wrong? When Alpha King Kaelor Draven stood before his empire and declared his love for the fragile, noble beauty instead of his fated mate, the realm erupted in celebration. They called it romance. They called it sacrifice. But behind closed doors, it was nothing more than fear dressed up as devotion. And the woman he threw away? She didn't just survive the frozen hell he sent her to. She came back as something far worse than his nightmares could ever imagine. Stick around till the end because this tale gets bloody. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is out there listening. The throne room stank of perfume and lies. Lyanna Frost stood perfectly still in the center of the marble floor, her hands clasped in front of her abdomen like she'd been taught since childhood. The position was supposed to convey humility, grace, the posture of a proper Luna standing before her Alpha King, but her nails were digging crescents into her palms, hard enough to draw blood. Around her, the gathered nobles whispered behind jeweled fans and gloved hands. Their eyes gleamed with the kind of hunger that only comes from watching someone else's world collapse in real time. The chandeliers overhead burned with enough candles to light a small village for a month, casting shadows that danced across the gilded walls like specters waiting to feast. Kaelor sat on his throne 20 feet away, broad-shouldered and carved from muscle and old violence. His jaw was set in that familiar hard line she used to trace with her fingertips in the dark. Now it just looked like stone, cold, unmovable, already decided. Seraphine Vale stood beside him, one delicate hand resting on the arm of his throne like she'd already claimed it. Her dress was pale blue silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year, and her blonde hair fell in perfect ringlets that had definitely taken 3 handmaidens half a day to arrange. She looked like something out of a painting, soft, innocent, breakable, everything Lyanna wasn't. Lyanna had dirt under her nails from the morning patrol. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her dress was deep gray wool because she'd spent the dawn hours walking the eastern borders where the cold bit through anything fancier. She looked like what she was, a woman built for survival, not decoration. And apparently that was the problem. The High Chancellor stepped forward, unrolling a scroll with practiced ceremony. His voice carried through the vaulted chamber like a death knell. Lyanna Frost, formerly recognized as fated mate to His Majesty King Kaelor Draven, you stand accused of treason against the crown, conspiracy to harm a noble lady under royal protection, and crimes against the sacred bond of mate law. The words hit her like physical blows, but she didn't flinch. Wouldn't give them that satisfaction. These charges, the Chancellor continued, his eyes never meeting hers, carry a penalty of death. However, in his mercy, His Majesty has chosen exile instead. You will be stripped of your title, your lands, and your name. You will be escorted to the borders of Black Hollow before nightfall and released into the wastelands. No supplies, no guards, no mercy. A woman in the third row gasped dramatically. Someone else murmured something about justice being served. Lyanna's eyes found Kaelor's across the distance. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But it drowned just as quickly under whatever fear was driving him, and his face went blank again. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the Chancellor asked, though his tone suggested he didn't actually care about the answer. Lyanna's voice came out steady, colder than the winter waiting for her outside these walls. "I have nothing to defend. I committed no crime." Seraphine's fingers tightened on Kaelor's armrest. "She threatened me," the noble girl said, her voice trembling just enough to sound vulnerable. "She came to my chambers 3 nights ago and said I would never be safe as long as she drew breath. She said the bond between her and His Majesty would destroy anyone who tried to stand between them. It was a beautiful lie." Seraphine delivered it with exactly the right amount of fear and hurt, her blue eyes going glossy with unshed tears. Lyanna had been nowhere near Seraphine's chambers 3 nights ago. She'd been in the North Tower, alone, staring at maps and trying to figure out how to save a kingdom that was already choosing to let her burn. "That's not true," Lyanna said simply. "You calling Lady Seraphine a liar?" This came from Lord Heron, one of Kaelor's oldest advisors. He was smiling like a wolf who'd just cornered a rabbit. "I'm saying I wasn't there." You have witnesses to your whereabouts? The Chancellor asked. No, because she'd been alone. Because she'd learned a long time ago that the only person she could rely on was herself. And even that was starting to feel like a miscalculation. Kaelor finally spoke. His voice was deep and rough, the same voice that used to whisper her name in the dark, like a prayer. Now it just sounded tired. The mate bond is sacred, he said, not looking at her. But it doesn't give anyone the right to harm an innocent. Seraphine has done nothing wrong. She didn't ask for this situation. Neither did I. Lyanna laughed, couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and humorless, echoing off the marble columns. You didn't ask for this? She took a step forward, and immediately 6 guards moved to intercept, hands on sword hilts. She stopped. You made a choice, Kaelor. You chose her. You chose to break a bond that's older than this empire. You chose to parade her in front of the court like some kind of prize, while I stood there and smiled and pretended my chest wasn't being ripped open. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't ask for this. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to save her life, by ending mine. You won't die in Black Hollow. You're stronger than that. You don't know what I am anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a heartbeat, the throne room went so quiet she could hear the candles burning. Then Seraphine spoke again, softer this time. I never wanted this. I told him to honor the bond. I told him I would step aside. But the prophecy, we'll see. There is no prophecy, Lyanna cut her off. There's just a convenient excuse to get rid of the woman who doesn't fit the story you want to tell. Kaelor stood. The movement was sharp enough to make half the room step back instinctively. When an Alpha King rises from his throne in anger, people remember why they're supposed to be afraid. Enough! His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that made wolves drop to their knees and bare their throats. The decision is made. You will leave before the sun sets. Anything you say from this point forward will only make it worse. Lyanna met his eyes, held them. Let him see exactly what he was doing. There's nothing you could do to make this worse, she said quietly. You already killed me. You're just letting the cold finish the job. Something cracked in his expression. For half a second, she saw the man she used to know, the one who'd held her through nightmares and traced constellations on her skin and promised her forever like he actually meant it. Then the mask came back down, and he was just a king again, just a man choosing fear over everything else. Take her to the transport, he said to the guards. Make sure she reaches the border before dark. 2 guards moved forward, reaching for her arms. Lyanna jerked away from their touch. I can walk on my own. They let her. That was something at least. Let her keep that tiny scrap of dignity as she turned her back on the throne room and the man she'd stupidly thought would choose her when it mattered. The crowd parted like water as she walked. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Most just looked entertained. Lady Morrigan, one of the older nobles, actually smiled as Lyanna passed. Such a shame, she murmured to her companion, just loud enough to be heard. She had such potential, but you can't fight fate, can you? Lyanna didn't respond, didn't give her the satisfaction. She kept walking, boots clicking against marble, spine straight, hands steady at her sides. If they were going to watch her leave, she'd make damn sure they remembered how she carried herself on the way out. The throne room doors were massive oak reinforced with iron, carved with scenes of ancient battles and long-dead kings. They swung open as she approached, revealing the corridor beyond. And standing just outside, partially hidden in shadow, was Kieran. Kaelor's younger brother stopped mid-step when he saw her, his expression shifting through several emotions too quickly to name. Surprise. Anger. Something that might have been guilt. Lyanna, don't. She didn't slow down, didn't look at him. Whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it. He fell into step beside her anyway, matching her pace. The guard stayed a respectful 3 feet back, giving the prince space. He's making a mistake, Kieran said quietly. He's making a choice. There's a difference. It's the wrong choice. Then tell him that. I did. He won't listen. Lyanna stopped walking, turned to face him fully. Kieran was younger than Kaelor by 3 years, leaner and sharper, with the kind of face that looked like it was always calculating odds. They had the same dark hair, the same strong jaw, but where Kaelor burned like a forge fire, Kieran was all cold edges and quiet intensity. Why are you here? She asked. He glanced at the guards, then back to her. Because someone needs to witness this. Someone needs to remember what happened here today. So you can write it down in the history books? Make sure future generations know how their king chose a pretty lie over an ugly truth? So I can make sure you're remembered as more than a cautionary tale. Lyanna studied his face, looking for the angle. There was always an angle with Kieran. He was the second son, the one who'd learned to survive by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. What do you want from me? She asked. Stay alive, he said. That's all. Just stay alive long enough for this to matter. For what to matter? But he was already stepping back, melting into the shadows of the corridor like he'd never been there at all. The guards moved forward, filling the space he'd occupied. Time to go, my lady, one of them said, not unkindly. Lyanna turned and kept walking. They led her through the palace corridors she knew by heart, past the gallery where she'd spent hours studying portraits of dead queens, past the library where she'd read everything she could find about border defenses and military strategy because she'd actually thought she'd be helping run this empire someday, past the east wing where Kaelor's chambers were, where their chambers had been once upon a time. The door was closed now, probably locked, probably already being redecorated for Seraphine's delicate tastes. One of the guards cleared his throat. We need to keep moving, my lady. She hadn't realized she'd stopped walking, hadn't realized she was staring at that closed door like it might open and rewrite the last 3 hours. Right, she said. Let's go. They took her out through the servants' entrance. Of course they did. Couldn't have the disgraced Luna walking through the main gates where people might ask questions or show sympathy. The courtyard was empty except for a single transport wagon and 2 horses. The wagon was the kind used for moving supplies to the northern outposts. Wooden, unheated, built for cargo, not people. A man in a dark cloak stood beside it, checking the horses' harnesses. When he turned, Lyanna recognized him. Captain Varen. One of the few guards who'd ever treated her like a person instead of a political inconvenience. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the tightness around his eyes. The way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Captain, she said. My lady. He gave her a short nod. I'm to escort you to the Black Hollow border. Lucky you. Orders are orders. Even when they're wrong, his eyes met hers for just a moment. Especially then. She climbed into the wagon without help. The interior was bare except for a thin blanket that looked like it had seen better decades. No supplies. No provisions. Exactly as the sentence had stated. Varen secured the rear gate and moved to the driver's seat. The palace guards stepped back, their duty completed. As the wagon lurched into motion, Lyanna looked back at the palace one last time. The white stone walls gleamed in the afternoon sun, beautiful and cold and impenetrable. Flags bearing Kaelor's crest snapped in the wind. Somewhere in there, he was probably already trying to forget her. The wagon rolled through the city streets, and people stopped to stare. Word traveled fast in the capital. They already knew who she was and what had happened. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable with witnessing her fall. Others stared openly, drinking in every detail of the disgraced Luna being carted off to her doom. A woman spit on the ground as they passed. A child asked his mother why the lady looked so sad. Lyanna kept her expression blank, gave them nothing to feed on. They passed through the outer gates as the sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. Beyond the walls, the landscape shifted from manicured gardens and paved roads to rough terrain and wild forest. After an hour of silence, Varen spoke without turning around. There's a village about 2 days' walk south of where I'm supposed to leave you. If you move fast and the weather holds, you might make it. You're not supposed to tell me that. I'm not supposed to do a lot of things. Another mile passed. The forest grew thicker, the road narrower. The temperature was already dropping. By nightfall, it would be brutal. Why are you helping me? Lyanna asked. Varen was quiet for a long moment. My sister was a fated mate once. Her alpha rejected her for political reasons. She didn't survive the heartbreak. His voice was flat, empty of everything except old anger. So maybe I'm helping you because I couldn't help her. Or maybe I just think this whole thing is wrong from top to bottom. Your sister, what was her name? Doesn't matter now. She's gone. Lyanna closed her eyes. Another casualty of the mate bond. Another woman destroyed by the politics of powerful men making choices that benefited everyone except the people they were supposed to protect. The wagon rolled on. By the time they reached the border markers of Black Hollow territory, the sun was a bloody smear on the horizon. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees and the wind carried the promise of worse to come. Varen brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down. When he opened the rear gate, Lyanna saw exactly where he'd brought her. Black Hollow wasn't technically part of the Empire. It was a no man's land, a stretch of frozen wasteland that separated Kaelor's territory from the wild lands beyond. Nothing lived here except things that had adapted to survive in conditions that would kill normal wolves in hours. The ground was already crusted with ice. Skeletal trees clawed at the darkening sky. In the distance, she could see the jagged mountains that gave the place its name, black stone peaks that looked like broken teeth. "This is as far as I go," Varen said. He pulled something from his coat and held it out to her, a small blade in a leather sheath. "Take it. I'll report it was lost in transport." Lyanna took the knife. It wasn't much, but it was more than she was supposed to have. "Thank you." He nodded once, then climbed back onto the driver's seat. Before he could snap the reins, Lyanna spoke again. "Varen, when you get back, if anyone asks, tell them I walked into the waste without looking back. Tell them I didn't beg or cry or ask for mercy. You want them to think you went down fighting. I want them to remember I went down at all." Something shifted in his expression. "I'll make sure they remember." The wagon pulled away, wheels crunching over frozen ground. Lyanna watched until it disappeared around a bend in the road, taking the last connection to her old life with it. Then she was alone. The wind picked up, cutting through her dress like it was made of paper instead of wool. The sky was rapidly losing light, purple and gray clouds rolling in from the north. Storm clouds. Of course, because this day hadn't been brutal enough already. Lyanna wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders and started walking. Not toward the village Varen had mentioned. That was too obvious. If Kaelor wanted her dead, he'd have people watching the obvious routes. Instead, she headed deeper into the hollow, toward the mountains where the cold lived year-round and the ice never fully melted. If she was going to die out here, she'd do it on her terms, not cowering in some half-frozen village, waiting for mercy that would never come. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Her fingers were already going numb despite being tucked under the blanket. She could feel the temperature dropping with every step, the kind of cold that didn't just chill you. It invaded, conquered, shut down your body piece by piece until there was nothing left but frozen meat. She'd read about Black Hollow in the palace library. How the first settlers had tried to establish outposts here and failed. How entire battalions had been lost to the winter. How the ice claimed everything eventually. Fitting place for a rejected Luna to end up. The first snowflakes started falling an hour after Varen left. Small at first, then larger, until the air was thick with white. Within minutes, visibility dropped to a few feet in any direction. Lyanna kept walking. Her dress dragged in the accumulating snow, soaking through and adding extra weight to every step. Her feet lost feeling around the same time the sky went fully dark. She stumbled over something, caught herself on a tree trunk, kept moving, had to keep moving. The moment she stopped, it was over. The wind howled through the trees, and for a moment it sounded like voices, screaming, laughing, calling her name. She shook her head, trying to clear it. Hypothermia made you hallucinate, made you think you were warm when you were freezing, made you lie down in the snow and never get back up. Keep moving, one foot in front of the other. Don't think about Kaelor. Don't think about Seraphine's hand on his throne. Don't think about the life you were supposed to have. Just walk. The ground started sloping upward, steeper, rocky beneath the snow. She was climbing now, though she couldn't remember deciding to climb. Her hands were blue. She could see that much when lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating the wasteland in stark white flashes. Not lightning, too frequent, too rhythmic. She looked up through the swirling snow and saw it. The aurora. Bands of crimson light rippled across the sky, bleeding through the storm clouds like the heavens themselves were wounded. She'd never seen the aurora this far south. It usually stayed up in the far north, where the old magic still ran thick in the ground. Red aurora meant something. She'd read about it once, in a book so old the pages crumbled when she turned them. Red aurora meant bloodline's awakening. She laughed. The sound came out broken and half frozen. Of course. Of course the sky would choose now to put on a show. One last cosmic joke before she died in the snow like every other fool who'd challenged this place. Her foot caught on something and she went down hard, face first into a drift. For a moment, she just lay there. The snow wasn't as cold as it should be. Actually felt kind of warm, comfortable. That was bad. That meant she was close to the end. Get up, but her body wouldn't respond. Too heavy, too tired, too broken. The crimson light painted the snow around her in shades of blood and shadow. Pretty, in a terrible sort of way. She thought about Kaelor one last time, wondered if he'd feel it when she died. If the severed mate bond would send one final pulse of agony through his chest, just enough to make him pause in whatever he was doing and remember for half a second what he'd thrown away. Probably not. He'd probably be too busy with Seraphine to notice. The snow was piling up around her now, covering her like a burial shroud. The cold was everywhere and nowhere. Her heartbeat was slowing down. She could feel it, each beat taking longer, weaker. Then something changed. Heat. Real heat, not the hallucination kind. It started in her chest, right where the mate bond used to sit like a warm constant. But this was different, hotter, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. She tried to move and found she could. Her fingers dug into the snow, and where they touched, the ice hissed and melted. What the hell? The heat intensified. Her back arched involuntarily as something inside her chest cracked open, some seal or lock she hadn't known was there. The crimson aurora overhead pulsed brighter, responding to whatever was happening inside her body. Then the pain hit, not like being stabbed or burned. This was deeper, cellular, like every piece of her DNA was being rewritten in real time, and her body was trying to decide whether to accept the changes or shut down entirely. She screamed into the snow, voice lost in the wind. Her vision went white, then red. Then something beyond color, beyond sight. She saw herself from above, a dark figure half buried in snow with crimson light pouring from her skin like she was cracking open from the inside. She saw further, the mountains, the empire beyond. The palace where Kaelor slept beside his chosen lover, unaware that the woman he'd condemned to death was being remade into something that would reshape the entire world. She saw her own bloodline stretching back through generations. Faces she didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Warriors and queens and alphas who'd ruled before Kaelor's family had ever touched power. And she saw the name that had been buried, hidden, erased from every history book. Crimson Wolf. The last thought she had before consciousness left her completely was that Kaelor had made a terrible mistake, and he was going to pay for it in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Then the cold finally claimed her, and Lyanna Frost died in the snow. But something else woke up. The cold should have killed her, should have frozen her blood solid, turned her organs to ice, left her corpse buried under snow until spring thaw revealed what was left. That's how Black Hollow worked. That's how it had always worked. But Lyanna's eyes opened anyway. The first thing she registered was warmth. Real, bone-deep warmth that had nothing to do with hypothermia hallucinations. The second thing was stone. Rough-hewn walls curved overhead, firelight dancing across surfaces that looked hand-carved instead of natural formation. She was inside somewhere. Underground, maybe. The air smelled like smoke and herbs and something wild she couldn't name. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Every muscle felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together wrong. When she tried to sit up, pain lanced through her spine, hard enough to make her vision white out for a second. A hand pressed against her shoulder, firm but not rough, pushing her back down. "Stay still. You're not ready to move yet." The voice was female, low and raspy, like its owner had spent years breathing smoke and shouting orders. Lyanna's vision cleared enough to make out a face hovering above her. Older woman, maybe 50, with scars crossing her left cheek and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything anymore. "Where am I?" Lyanna managed. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. The woman reached for something beyond Lyanna's line of sight and came back with a wooden cup. "Water. Drink slow or you'll just bring it back up." Lyanna drank. The water was cold and tasted faintly metallic, but it helped. She got half the cup down before her stomach started to rebel, and the woman pulled it away. "You've been out for 3 days," the woman said. "We found you in the northern pass, half dead and glowing like a funeral pyre. Wasn't sure if you'd wake up human or something else." Lyanna's hand went instinctively to her chest, to the place where the mate bond used to sit like a constant weight. It was gone now, completely severed, but in its place was something different, hotter, deeper, like a second heartbeat made of molten metal. What happened to me? The woman sat back on her heels, studying Lyanna's face with the kind of intensity usually reserved for studying weapons or enemies. "That's what we're trying to figure out. You set off every ward we had within a 20-mile radius. The aurora went red as blood the night you collapsed, and the elders started muttering about old bloodlines waking up. So why don't you tell me who you really are, and we'll go from there." Lyanna tried to sit up again. This time the woman didn't stop her, just watched as Lyanna pushed herself upright with shaking arms. The room spun for a second, then settled. She was in what looked like a cave that had been converted into living space. Furs covered the stone floor. A fire burned in a pit carved into the center, smoke rising through a natural chimney. Weapons hung on the walls. Not decorative pieces. Working blades that had seen use and been maintained with care. "My name is Lyanna Frost," she said. "I was the fated mate of Alpha King Kaelor Draven. He exiled me to Black Hollow 4 days ago for treason I didn't commit." The woman's expression didn't change. "So you're the one." "The one what?" "The one he threw away to save his pet noble. Word travels. Even out here. The capital's been buzzing about it for weeks. The great Alpha King choosing love over duty. Very romantic, very stupid. You know about Seraphine. Everyone knows about Seraphine Vale. Delicate little thing who supposedly captured the king's heart. Though if you ask me, the only thing she captured was his fear." The woman stood, moving to the fire to add another log. "Men like Kaelor don't break sacred bonds over love. They break them over threats they don't know how to fight." "The prophecy," Lyanna said quietly. The woman glanced back at her. "You know about that then? I know Seraphine used it as an excuse to get rid of me. I know Kaelor believed her enough to destroy everything we had. And you think that makes you special?" The woman's tone was flat. "Makes you a victim worth saving." Lyanna felt anger flare hot in her chest, mixing with that new heat that had taken root there. "I didn't ask to be saved. I didn't ask for any of this. No. You just walked into the worst winter in 50 years wearing a wool dress and carrying nothing but pride." The woman turned fully now, and Lyanna saw she was taller than she'd first appeared, broader through the shoulders, built like someone who'd spent her entire life fighting. "What exactly were you planning to do out there? Freeze to death with dignity? Better than crawling back and begging, maybe. Or maybe you were just too stubborn to admit you needed help." Lyanna pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shook but held. "Who are you?" The woman crossed her arms. "Name's Riva Ashclaw. I run the Southern Watch for the Ashfang clan. And before you ask, yes, we're the tribe your precious empire pretends doesn't exist. The ones who got pushed out to the edges when Kaelor's grandfather decided to expand his territory and didn't care who he had to bury to do it. I've never heard of the Ashfang clan. That was the point. Easier to steal land from people who officially don't exist." Riva moved to a wooden table against the far wall and poured something from a clay jug into 2 cups. "Your king's family has been trying to erase us from history for 3 generations. Funny how that works. They take everything from us, then act like we were never here to begin with." She brought one of the cups to Lyanna. "Drink. It'll help with the pain." Lyanna took it. The liquid inside was amber-colored and smelled like pine needles and something sharper. She drank anyway. It burned going down, but the pain in her muscles started to ease almost immediately. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Riva's smile was sharp. "Wrong question. Right question is, what do you want from yourself? Because the woman who walked into that blizzard 4 days ago isn't the same one standing here now. Something changed in you out there. Something big enough to wake up bloodlines that have been sleeping for centuries. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Riva gestured at Lyanna's chest. "That heat you're feeling right now. That second heartbeat that doesn't match your pulse. You think that's normal? You think humans just develop random internal fire sources and survive conditions that would kill full-blooded alphas in their prime?" Lyanna's hand went back to her chest without conscious thought. The heat pulsed under her palm like it was responding to her attention. What is it? Power. Old power. The kind that got your ancestors killed when they tried to hold on to it. Riva drained her own cup and set it down hard on the table. You want the truth? You're not just some discarded mate who got dumped in the snow. You're a crimson wolf. Last of a bloodline so dangerous that Kaelor's family spent 200 years making sure everyone forgot it ever existed. The words hit Lyanna like a physical blow. She'd seen that name in her vision, in that moment before the cold took her. Seen faces and histories, and a legacy that stretched back before the current empire even existed. That's impossible. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you survived 3 days in Black Hollow without food, water, or shelter, and you're not dead. You triggered every ancestral ward we have, and right now your eyes are doing something they definitely weren't doing when you were just a regular Luna. What are my eyes doing? Glowing. Just a little. Crimson, like the aurora. Lyanna's hands started shaking. She looked down at them, half expecting to see claws or scales or some other proof that she'd turned into something inhuman. But they looked the same, pale, scarred across the knuckles from years of training. Ordinary. I don't feel different. Give it time. Riva moved back to the fire, settling onto one of the fur-covered stones arranged around it. What you're experiencing now is just the beginning. The awakening happens in stages. Right now, your body is still adjusting to the change. In a few days, you'll start noticing other things. Strength you didn't have before. Senses that work differently. Instincts that don't match what you were taught. And if I don't want this, then you'll die anyway. Just slower and more painfully than if you'd frozen to death in the snow. Riva's tone was matter-of-fact. Bloodline awakenings don't ask permission. They happen, and you either adapt or you burn out from the inside. I've seen it go both ways. Lyanna sat down slowly on one of the other stones. Her mind was racing, trying to process information that didn't fit with anything she thought she knew about herself. The Crimson Wolves were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago in a war nobody talked about anymore. Except apparently they weren't extinct. Apparently one of them had been living in the capital, playing Luna to an Alpha King who didn't even know what he'd really thrown away. Why didn't this happen before, she asked. If I'm really one of them, why now? Because you were safe before. Riva poked at the fire with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. You had your mate bond. You had your place in the Empire. You had protection. Dormant bloodlines stay dormant as long as they don't have to wake up. But the second you lost all of that, the second you were actually dying, it kicked in. Self-preservation. Your blood decided you were worth saving even if the rest of the world didn't. The heat in Lyanna's chest pulsed again, and this time she felt it spread down her arms. Not painful, just present. A reminder that her body had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. How many of you are there? She asked. The Ashfang clan. Enough! Riva's answer was deliberately vague. We keep our numbers quiet for obvious reasons. Hard to hunt what you can't count. But we're not the only ones. There are other clans scattered across the territories. Other bloodlines that survived the purges by going underground and staying there. And you just happened to find me in the middle of a blizzard. We weren't looking for you specifically. But when the wards went off, we had to investigate. Can't have unknown power sources erupting in our territory without at least checking to see if they're hostile. Riva glanced at her. Lucky for you, we got there before something else did. Black Hollow isn't empty, you know. Things live in those mountains that would have eaten you alive and used your bones for decoration. Lyanna thought about the howling she'd heard in the storm, the voices that might not have been hallucinations after all. What kind of things? The kind that used to be human before they stayed out here too long. The kind that hunt in packs and don't leave survivors. Riva stood and moved to the cave entrance, pushing aside a heavy curtain made of stitched hides. Outside, Lyanna could see snow falling in thick sheets. We don't go north of the second ridge after dark. Nothing good lives past that point. A younger voice called from somewhere beyond the curtain. Riva, Council wants to see her. Now, preferably. Riva sighed. Tell them she just woke up. She needs time to adjust. They said now. Of course they did. Riva let the curtain fall back into place and turned to Lyanna. Can you walk without falling over? Lyanna stood. Her legs still felt unsteady, but they held. Yes. Then we're going to see the elders. Try not to say anything that'll make them decide you're a threat. They're old and suspicious, and they've survived this long by killing first and asking questions never. Riva led her through a series of tunnels that connected the cave to what turned out to be an entire underground settlement. Lyanna had read about places like this in historical texts. Refugee communities built during times of war, designed to hide entire populations from invading armies. But those were supposed to be abandoned. Empty ruins slowly collapsing under the weight of centuries. This place was very much alive. They passed chambers converted into living quarters, storage rooms, what looked like a communal kitchen, where several people stopped stirring pots to stare as Lyanna walked by. Children ran through the corridors, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Older men and women worked at various tasks, repairing weapons, curing hides, sorting through supplies. It was a functioning society, organized, efficient, completely invisible to the empire that thought it had erased them. "How long has this been here?" Lyanna asked quietly. "Since before your king's family took the throne." Riva's voice was equally low. "We were already old when they were still figuring out which end of a sword to hold, and will still be here long after their dynasty collapses." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber that had been carved into a rough circle. 7 people sat on raised stone seats arranged in a half circle, all of them old enough to have seen at least 6 decades, some of them clearly much older. Their eyes tracked Lyanna as she entered, measuring and judging with the kind of intensity that made her skin prickle. Riva stopped a respectful distance from the seats and gave a shallow bow. "Elders." "She's awake." The woman in the center seat leaned forward. She was ancient, face weathered into deep lines, hair white as fresh snow. But her eyes were sharp and clear, missing nothing. Lyanna Frost. The voice was surprisingly strong for someone so old. Formerly of the capital. Formerly Luna to Alpha King Kaelor Draven, currently glowing like a forge fire and carrying a bloodline we thought was extinct. "Did I miss anything?" Lyanna met her gaze. "You missed the part where I didn't ask for any of this." A younger elder, maybe 60, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, snorted. "No one asks for their blood to wake up. It happens or it doesn't. Question is what you plan to do about it." "I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it." The central elder studied her for a long moment. "Your bloodline carries responsibilities, powers, and dangers. The Crimson Wolves were the first alphas, the ones who established the mate bonds, who created the laws that every pack still follows. They were also the ones who got too powerful for their own good and threatened the balance of everything. So they were destroyed. So they were supposed to be destroyed." The elder's tone made it clear there was a difference. But bloodlines are stubborn things. They hide. They wait. They find ways to survive even when they shouldn't. And now one has woken up inside you, and we need to know if you're going to be a problem. Lyanna felt that heat in her chest flare hotter. "I'm not a problem. I'm just trying to stay alive." "Everyone's trying to stay alive." "That doesn't answer the question." The scarred elder leaned back in his seat. "What do you want, girl? Revenge on the king who threw you away? Power to burn his empire to ash? Or are you just looking for a warm hole to crawl into until this all blows over?" The blunt question caught Lyanna off guard. She'd been so focused on survival, on processing what had happened to her, that she hadn't stopped to think about what came next. What did she want? A week ago, the answer would have been simple. She wanted her life back. Wanted Kaelor to realize his mistake and come find her. Wanted everything to go back to the way it was before Seraphine and prophecies and exile. But that woman was gone. Died in the snow alongside all her stupid hopes. The woman standing here now wanted something different. "I want to understand what I am," Lyanna said slowly. "I want to know why this bloodline exists and what it means. And I want to make sure the people who tried to erase me regret that decision." The elders exchanged glances. Some looked satisfied, others skeptical. "Revenge is a weak foundation," the central elder said. "It burns hot and fast, then leaves you empty. What happens when you've gotten your pound of flesh and you're still standing there with power you don't know how to use? Then I'll figure it out." Lyanna's voice was steady. "I've spent my entire life being told what to do and how to be, playing by rules that were designed to keep me small and grateful for whatever scraps I was given. I'm done with that. Whatever happens next, it's going to be on my terms." The scarred elder smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "There it is." The Crimson Wolf arrogance. I was wondering when it would show up. It's not arrogance to want control over my own life. No. But it's arrogance to think you can learn in months what took your ancestors centuries to master. The Central Elder stood, and the movement commanded immediate attention. You want to understand your bloodline? Fine, we'll teach you. But you need to understand what you're asking for. This path doesn't lead back to the capital. It doesn't lead to reconciliation or happy endings. Once you start walking it, there's no going back to being the woman you were. Lyanna thought about Kaelor's face when he'd condemned her, about Seraphine's hand on his throne, about the nobles who'd watched her exile like it was entertainment. Good, she said. I don't want to go back. The Central Elder nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. You train with us. You learn what your blood can do. And in return, you owe the Ashfang clan a debt. What kind of debt? The kind that gets called in when we need it. Could be next month. Could be next decade. But when we ask, you answer. Those are the terms. Lyanna knew she should probably negotiate, ask for specifics, get something in writing. But the heat in her chest was pulsing in a rhythm that felt like agreement, like her blood itself was saying yes. This is right. This is what we need. Agreed, she said. Riva let out a breath beside her. Welcome to the clan, then. Try not to die during training. The elders get cranky when students explode. The training started the next morning. Lyanna woke before dawn in a small chamber that had been assigned to her. Just a sleeping roll and a chest for belongings she didn't have. But it was hers. Nobody could take it away or use it as leverage. That was worth more than comfort. Riva was waiting outside, holding 2 wooden practice swords. We're starting with basics. Need to see what you can actually do before we get into the complicated stuff. She led Lyanna to a wide cavern that had been converted into a training ground. The floor was packed earth instead of stone, marked with circles and lines that probably meant something to people who knew how to read them. A dozen other people were already there, running through drills or sparring in pairs. They ranged in age from teenagers to warriors who looked like they'd been fighting since before Lyanna was born. All of them stopped to watch when Lyanna entered. She felt their eyes like physical weight, judging, calculating, wondering if she was worth the resources being spent on her. Ignore them, Riva said quietly. They'll get over it once you prove you're not dead weight. She tossed one of the practice swords to Lyanna, who caught it on instinct. The weight was different from the blade she'd trained with in the capital. Heavier, meant for actual combat instead of ceremonial demonstrations. Show me what you know, Riva said, taking a ready stance. Lyanna moved without thinking. Years of training kicked in, muscle memory taking over. She went for a standard opening attack, testing Riva's defense. Riva blocked it almost casually and swept Lyanna's legs out from under her. Lyanna hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Too slow. Riva stood over her, not even breathing hard. Too predictable. You're fighting like you're in a palace courtyard with padded floors and spectators. This isn't that. Get up. Lyanna pushed herself upright. Her pride stung worse than her tailbone. They went again. This time Lyanna tried to be less predictable, mixing up her rhythm and going for openings that weren't in the standard forms. Riva still put her on the ground inside 10 seconds. Better. Still terrible, but better. The older woman pulled Lyanna to her feet. You've got the basics down, but you fight like you're afraid of getting hurt. Out here, getting hurt is part of the process. You need to stop treating pain like failure and start treating it like information. They drilled for hours. Every time Lyanna thought she was getting the hang of it, Riva would change tactics or introduce a new variable that sent everything spinning apart again. By midday, Lyanna was covered in bruises and her hands were blistered from the practice sword's grip, but she was starting to understand what Riva meant. The pain did carry information, where her guard was weak, when her footwork got sloppy, which attacks left her overextended. She was starting to adapt to it instead of just enduring it. During a water break, one of the younger warriors approached. Male, maybe 25, with the kind of build that came from a lifetime of heavy labor. His expression was carefully neutral. "You're the Crimson Wolf," he said. "Apparently. You don't look that dangerous." Lyanna took a long drink from her water skin, then met his eyes. "Give it time." He studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod and walked away. "That was Garrett," Riva said. He lost his sister to one of Kaelor's border patrols 3 years ago. So don't expect him to be friendly just because you used to sleep in the king's bed. I don't expect anyone here to be friendly. Good. Keep those expectations low and you might survive long enough to be useful. The afternoon training was different. Instead of combat drills, Riva led Lyanna to a smaller chamber deep in the tunnels. This one had been carved with symbols that looked older than the settlement itself, angular shapes that hurt to look at directly. Sit, Riva instructed, pointing to a circle in the center of the floor. Lyanna sat. The stone was cold through her training clothes. Riva settled across from her. What you did in the blizzard, when your bloodline woke up, that wasn't just random chance. It was triggered by extreme conditions pushing you past normal limits. Now we need to figure out how to access that power without nearly dying first. How? By teaching you to look inward instead of outward. Most wolves focus on physical strength, pack bonds, external power structures. Crimson wolves were different. Their power came from understanding the self at a level most people never reach. They could reshape reality because they understood how they fit into it. That sounds like mystical nonsense. Probably because it is mystical nonsense. But it also works, which is what matters. Riva closed her eyes. Focus on that heat in your chest. Don't try to control it. Just observe it. Notice how it moves, where it concentrates, what it responds to. Lyanna closed her eyes and turned her attention inward. The heat was still there, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, but separate from it. When she focused on it, it seemed to intensify slightly. Good, Riva said, even though Lyanna hadn't spoken. You're already connected to it. That's further than most people get on day one. Now see if you can make it spread. Push it down your arms. Just a little. Lyanna tried. The heat resisted at first, staying concentrated in her chest. Then something shifted, and she felt warmth trickling down her right arm, like blood flowing through a newly opened vein. Her eyes snapped open. I felt it move. Because you're not fighting it anymore. Riva's expression was satisfied. Most people spend weeks trying to force their power to obey them. You're working with it instead. That's the difference between channeling and controlling. They practiced for hours. By the end of the session, Lyanna could push the heat through her entire body, though it still felt unpredictable. Sometimes it flowed easily. Other times it refused to budge no matter how hard she focused. It'll get easier, Riva assured her as they left the chamber. Right now, your body is still adjusting to having that much power running through it. Give it a few weeks and it'll start to feel natural. Lyanna wasn't sure she wanted it to feel natural. Natural implied she'd accepted this, integrated it into her identity. But what choice did she have? This was what she was now. Might as well learn how to use it. Dinner was communal, eaten in the large gathering cavern with the rest of the clan. Lyanna sat with Riva and a few other warriors, listening to conversations flow around her in a dialect that was close enough to capital speech but rougher around the edges. They talked about supply runs and patrol schedules, and which tunnels needed reinforcement before the spring melt. Normal logistics of survival. Nothing about bloodlines or ancient prophecies or exiled lunas. It was almost peaceful. Then someone mentioned Kaelor's name, and the entire table went quiet. Heard he's mobilizing troops near the eastern border, one of the older warriors said. 3 battalions at least. Maybe more. Why would he do that? Another asked. Riva's expression went dark. Because the noble houses are getting restless. When an Alpha King shows weakness by breaking a mate bond, it opens questions about his fitness to rule. He's probably trying to remind everyone that he's still strong enough to crush dissent. Or he's preparing for something bigger, the first warrior countered. Word is the northern territories are pushing back against imperial taxes. Could be heading toward a real rebellion if he doesn't handle it right. Lyanna kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. If Kaelor was dealing with internal instability, that changed things. A strong, unified empire would be nearly impossible to challenge. But a fractured one, full of nobles questioning their king and territories considering independence, that was vulnerable. That was an opportunity. Riva caught her eye across the table and gave the smallest shake of her head. A warning. Don't get ideas above your current skill level. But the ideas were already forming. If she could master this power, if she could become what her bloodline was supposed to be, she could use the Empire's weakness against them. She could become the very threat Kaelor had tried to eliminate. Training continued for weeks. Combat in the mornings, Power work in the afternoons, history lessons in the evenings, where the elders told her about the Crimson Wolves who'd come before. They'd been rulers, she learned, not just warriors, but architects of the entire pack system. They'd established the mate bonds as a way to create stability and prevent endless territorial wars. They'd written the first laws governing alpha succession, and then they'd been destroyed by the very system they created, because other bloodlines got jealous and afraid. Kaelor's ancestors had led the purge, hunted down every known Crimson Wolf in their families, burned their territories, erased their names from official records, all to make sure no one could ever challenge the new order. Learning this made the heat in Lyanna's chest burn hotter, made her training sessions more intense. She stopped pulling her strikes, stopped hesitating when Riva pushed her harder. She started pushing back. 1 month after waking up in the Ashfang caves, Lyanna finally beat Riva in a sparring match. It wasn't a fluke or a lucky strike. She read Riva's pattern, adapted to it, found the opening, and put the older warrior on the ground. The entire training cavern stopped to watch. Riva got up slowly, a rare smile crossing her scarred face. There it is. Took you long enough. That night the elders summoned Lyanna again. She stood before their seats, covered in sweat and bruises, and waited for judgment. The central elder spoke. You've progressed faster than we expected. Your power is stabilizing. Your combat skills are approaching competent. And you've stopped looking like a lost noble pretending to be a warrior. Thank you, Lyanna said, though she wasn't sure it was actually a compliment. But skill isn't the same as wisdom. The elder's tone sharpened. And before we invest any more resources in you, we need to know what you plan to do with what we've taught you. Lyanna had been expecting this question. She'd spent weeks thinking about the answer. I'm going to go back, she said quietly. Not to beg or reconcile. To reclaim what was stolen. The Empire thinks the Crimson Wolves are extinct. I'm going to prove them wrong, and I'm going to make sure everyone responsible for trying to erase us pays the price. The elders were silent for a long moment. Then the scarred elder laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. Ambitious, probably suicidal. But at least you're not boring. The central elder raised a hand for silence. If you move against the Empire, you'll be moving against Kaelor directly. Against the woman he chose over you. Against an entire system designed to crush threats like you before they can grow. Are you prepared for that? Lyanna thought about Seraphine's hand on the throne, about Kaelor's face when he'd sentenced her to death, about every noble who'd watched her exile like entertainment. Yes, she said, I'm prepared. Then we'll give you what you need. But understand this. Once you start this path, there's no mercy, no forgiveness. You'll become exactly what they feared the Crimson Wolves would be. A force that can't be controlled or negotiated with, just destroyed. The heat in Lyanna's chest pulsed once, hard and final. Good, she said. Let them try. 6 months of training turned Lyanna into something the capital wouldn't recognize. Her body had changed first. Muscle replaced softness, scars mapped new stories across her skin, and her hands developed the kind of calluses that came from holding weapons until they became extensions of her arms rather than tools. But the real transformation happened deeper. In the way she moved through space like she owned it. In the way her eyes tracked threats before her conscious mind registered them. In the way she stopped apologizing for taking up room in the world. The Ashfang warriors no longer watched her with skepticism. Now they watched with something closer to respect. Or fear. Sometimes both. Riva stood with her on the ridge overlooking the southern approach to Black Hollow, wind whipping through their hair hard enough to sting. Below them, the wasteland stretched in all directions, white and brutal and unforgiving. Time to move, Riva said. You've learned everything we can teach you in a cave. Rest requires field testing. Lyanna's hand went to the blade at her hip. Real steel now, not practice wood. The weight felt right. Familiar. Like it had always been there waiting for her to claim it. What did you have in mind? There's a supply convoy moving through the border territories 3 days from here. Imperial guards, taking taxes from villages that can barely feed themselves. Riva's voice was flat. We hit them, take the supplies, redistribute to the people who actually need them. Standard operation. You want me to attack the Empire. I want you to remember what they are, what they've always been. Riva turned to face her fully. You've been training to fight them, learning their weaknesses, building power to challenge them. But you're still thinking of them as some distant enemy you'll face eventually. They're not distant. They're right there, crushing people every single day. So yes, I want you to attack them. See how it feels when it's real instead of theoretical. Lyanna looked out over the wasteland, toward the empire she used to call home. 6 months ago, the idea of attacking Imperial forces would have been unthinkable, treasonous, worthy of execution. Now it just felt like justice taking its time. When do we leave? She asked. Dawn. Riva smiled sharp. Bring everything you've learned. You're going to need it. The convoy was exactly where Riva's scouts said it would be. 12 guards surrounding 4 heavy wagons loaded with grain, furs, and coin. Standard formation, standard routes, standard arrogance of soldiers who'd never been seriously challenged in their lives. Lyanna watched them from the tree line with 5 other Ashfang warriors spread out on either side. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. The heat in her chest pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, ready to be called on if needed. Riva gave the signal. They hit fast and hard from 3 directions simultaneously. Lyanna went in with the front group, blade already drawn, moving the way she'd been taught. Low and efficient, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The first guard she engaged barely got his sword up before she was inside his reach, striking at joints and weak points in his armor. He went down hard and didn't get back up. The heat in her chest flared and she felt strength flood through her muscles, the kind of power that came from her awakened bloodline rather than normal training. She used it without thinking, letting instinct guide her movements. A second guard came at her from the side. She spun, caught his blade on hers, and drove her elbow into his throat hard enough to crush his windpipe. He dropped choking. Around her, the other warriors were making similar work of the remaining guards. These weren't elite soldiers, just men doing a job, following orders, probably with families waiting for them back home. Lyanna killed 3 more before the fight ended. When it was over, she stood among the bodies and felt nothing. No guilt, no horror. Just cold satisfaction that she'd executed the techniques correctly and survived the encounter. Is this what her bloodline had done to her? Turned off the parts that used to care about taking lives? Or had those parts always been breakable, and she'd just never been pushed hard enough to find out? Reva was already at the wagons, directing warriors to transfer supplies. She glanced at Lyanna, taking in the blood on her blade and the bodies at her feet. How do you feel? Like I just passed a test. You did. Riva's expression was unreadable. Question is whether you're proud of that or afraid of it. Lyanna cleaned her blade on a dead guard's cloak and sheathed it. Does it matter? Eventually. Right now, help load the wagons. We need to move before reinforcements show up. They redistributed the supplies to 3 villages over the next week. Places so far from the capital that Imperial maps barely acknowledged they existed. The people there were hollow-eyed and desperate, surviving on hope and stubbornness because they had nothing else left. When Lyanna handed a bag of grain to a woman with 2 starving children clinging to her skirts, the woman started crying. Not from happiness, from the shock of someone actually helping instead of taking. That image stayed with Lyanna long after they left. Burned itself into her memory alongside every other piece of evidence that the empire she'd served her entire life was built on. Suffering, it refused to acknowledge. They made it back to Ashfang territory without incident. Riva reported the success to the elders, and Lyanna went to her chamber to clean blood and road dust from her gear. She was checking her blade for damage when Kieran walked in. Lyanna's hand went to her weapon on pure reflex before her brain registered who she was looking at. Kaelor's brother stood in her doorway like he belonged there, dressed in dark traveling clothes that did nothing to hide the royal bearing he'd been born into. "How did you find this place?" she said quietly. "I've known about the Ashfang clan for years." Kieran stepped inside and let the door close behind him. "Did you really think the Empire was ignorant of every hidden settlement in the territories? We just chose not to acknowledge them because eliminating them would cost more resources than ignoring them." "Then why are you here?" "Because I need to talk to you, and I'd prefer to do it somewhere my brother's spies can't hear every word." Lyanna didn't lower her hand from her weapon. "Talk fast." Kieran moved to the small table and sat without invitation. "The Empire is fracturing. Kaelor's decision to break the mate bond damaged his authority more than anyone anticipated. 3 noble houses are openly questioning his fitness to rule. The northern territories are refusing to pay taxes, and Seraphine is making moves that suggest she's not content to just be the king's beloved." "What kind of moves?" "The kind where she's been meeting secretly with Lord Heron, and several other council members. The kind where gold is changing hands and alliances are being formed. Kieran's voice was flat. She's building a power base, planning something, and Kaelor is too blinded by whatever he feels for her to see it. Why should I care if she betrays him? Let them destroy each other. Because when they do, it won't just be them who burn. The entire empire will collapse into civil war. Territories will fracture. Warlords will rise. Thousands will die in the chaos. Kieran leaned forward. You were Luna once. You know what that means. You have a responsibility to prevent that kind of suffering. I was Luna. Past tense. Your brother made sure of that when he threw me into a blizzard to die. And you survived. More than survived. Kieran's eyes tracked to her chest, where the heat pulsed beneath her skin. You became something more dangerous than he ever imagined. You have power now. Real power. The kind that could actually stabilize the Empire if you chose to use it that way. Lyanna laughed without humor. You want me to save the Empire that tried to kill me? To protect the man who condemned me? That's what you're asking. I'm asking you to think beyond revenge. Kieran's tone sharpened. Yes, Kaelor wronged you. Horribly. But he's still holding the Empire together by his fingernails, and if he falls, everyone falls with him, including people who had nothing to do with your exile. The heat in Lyanna's chest flared hot and angry. Those people watched me get dragged away. They smiled and whispered and treated my destruction like entertainment. Why should I lift a finger to save them? Because you're better than they are. Because you actually have the capacity to be what a Luna is supposed to be. A leader who protects instead of just ruling. The words hit harder than they should have. Lyanna turned away, looking at the stone wall instead of Kieran's face. What exactly are you proposing? Come back. Not as the rejected mate crawling home, as something new. A crimson wolf who's willing to work with the current system instead of burning it down. Kieran stood. Help Kaelor stabilize the Empire. Expose whatever Seraphine is planning. Prevent the civil war. And in return, you get recognition, power, a seat at the table where decisions are made. And Kaelor, what does he get? He gets to keep his throne. Maybe even his life. If Seraphine's planning what I think she's planning. You haven't told him about any of this. I can't. He won't listen to me about Seraphine. He thinks I'm jealous or trying to manipulate him. But he might listen to you. Lyanna turned back to face Kieran. Her hand was still on her weapon. Why would he listen to the woman he exiled? Because part of him regrets it. I see it every time your name comes up. Every time he has to make a decision you would have counseled him on. He broke the mate bond, but he didn't erase what you meant to him. That guilt is eating him alive. Good. Lyanna. Kieran's voice carried genuine urgency. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to use him. Play the long game. Get back inside the capital. Get close to the power structure. And when the time is right, take everything. But do it smart instead of bloody. The heat in her chest was pulsing faster now. Part of her wanted to tell Kieran to leave and never come back. Another part was already calculating odds and angles. If she went back, she'd be walking into enemy territory with nothing but her skills and her bloodline. One wrong move and she'd end up executed for real this time. But she'd also be inside. Close to Kaelor. Close to Seraphine. Close to the people who'd tried to erase her. Close enough to destroy them from within. I need to think about it, she said finally. Don't think too long. Kieran moved toward the door. Things are accelerating faster than anyone realizes. If you're going to make a move, it needs to be soon. He left as quietly as he'd arrived, and Lyanna was alone with her thoughts and the heat burning in her chest like a caged animal demanding to be set loose. She went to find Riva. The older warrior was in the training cavern, working through forms with a practice blade. She didn't stop when Lyanna entered, just kept moving through the sequences with the kind of fluid precision that only came from decades of repetition. Kaelor's brother was just here, Lyanna said. Riva finished her form before responding. I know. We let him in. Why? Because we wanted to hear what he'd say to you, whether he'd try to manipulate you or actually give you useful information. Riva set down the practice blade. So, which was it? Both, probably. Lyanna explained Kieran's proposal. The instability in the Empire. Seraphine's suspected conspiracy. The invitation to return and work from inside the system. Riva listened without interrupting. When Lyanna finished, the older warrior was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? She asked finally. I don't know. 6 months ago, the answer would have been simple. Go back. Reclaim my place. Make them all pay. But now you've seen what the Empire really is. Riva's voice was quiet. You've watched it grind people into dust for taxes and territory. You've killed its soldiers and felt nothing. You're not the same woman who'd go back for revenge or reconciliation. So what am I? Someone who has to decide what kind of power you want to be. The kind that burns everything down, or the kind that rebuilds from inside the ashes while they're still warm. Lyanna sat on one of the stone benches. The Ashfang clan saved me, trained me, gave me purpose when I had nothing. If I go back to the capital, I'm walking away from that. You're not walking away. You're taking what we taught you and using it where it matters most. Riva sat beside her. The elders knew this moment would come. We didn't train you to keep you here. We trained you to send you back as something they can't control or contain. A weapon, a force of nature. Riva's smile was sharp. And if Kieran is right about Seraphine planning something, then the Empire is about to tear itself apart anyway. Question is whether you want to watch from the outside or be in position to shape what comes after. The heat in Lyanna's chest pulsed once, hard and insistent. She knew what it wanted, what her bloodline demanded. Not safety, not peace, power, recognition. The chance to stand in front of everyone who'd dismissed her and prove they'd made a fatal mistake. I'll go back, she said, but not alone. I want backup. People I can trust in the capital who aren't part of the system. Riva nodded. We can arrange that. Plan a few of our own inside the city as servants or merchants. Give you eyes and ears Kaelor won't know about. And if it goes wrong, if Seraphine's conspiracy is bigger than Kieran thinks, and they try to kill me again, then you burn the whole place down and we collect the ashes. Riva stood. Either way, the Empire as it exists now is ending. You just get to decide whether you're there to witness it or whether you're the one holding the torch. 3 weeks later, Lyanna stood at the gates of the capital wearing clothes she barely recognized. Fine fabric instead of practical leather. Hair arranged in complicated braids that took 2 handmaidens an hour to complete. Jewelry that marked her as someone important rather than someone dangerous. She looked like a noble returning from travel, not a crimson wolf coming home to settle accounts. The guards at the gate studied her papers, then waved her through without a second glance. Just another wealthy visitor come to petition the king or attend court functions. She'd sent word ahead through Kieran, a carefully worded message requesting an audience with His Majesty regarding matters of imperial stability in northern territories. Formal enough to get attention, vague enough not to reveal her identity until she was already inside. The city had changed in 6 months, or maybe she'd changed and was seeing it differently now. The wealth on display in the merchant quarter, the beggars huddled in alleys just out of sight, the way nobles walked past suffering without even noticing it was there. She'd been part of this once, had walked these same streets and convinced herself the Empire was just and fair and worth serving. Now she saw it for what it was. A machine designed to concentrate power and wealth at the top while crushing everything beneath. And she was walking back into its heart by choice. Kieran met her in a private receiving room in the palace's east wing. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. You came, he said. I said I would. Saying and doing are different things. Kieran gestured for her to sit. Kaelor doesn't know it's you yet. I told him an emissary from the northern clans wanted to negotiate directly. He agreed to meet tomorrow evening. And Seraphine, still playing the devoted beloved in public, still meeting with Lord Heron and his faction in private. Kieran's jaw tightened. I've been gathering evidence, but it's fragmentary. Financial records that don't quite add up. Whispered conversations that stop when I enter rooms. Nothing concrete enough to bring to Kaelor without him dismissing it as paranoia. Then we get concrete evidence. How? By giving her enough rope to hang herself. Lyanna leaned back in her chair. If she's planning a move against Kaelor, she'll need to act soon. The longer she waits, the more chance someone discovers her conspiracy. So we accelerate the timeline, make her think circumstances are forcing her hand. You want to trigger the betrayal. I want to control when and where it happens instead of being blindsided by it. Better to face an enemy who's rushing than one who's had time to prepare every detail. Kieran studied her face. You've changed. 6 months in the wasteland will do that. It's not just the wasteland. You move differently, talk differently. There's something in your eyes that wasn't there before. Lyanna met his gaze and let him see the heat simmering beneath her surface. I died in the snow, Kieran. What came back isn't the woman your brother knew. Good. We need what you are now, not what you were then. The meeting with Kaelor was scheduled for sunset the following day. Lyanna spent the intervening time mapping the palace layout, noting changes and identifying exits. The Ashfang operatives who'd infiltrated the capital as servants made contact through subtle signals. 3 in the kitchens, 2 in the stables, 1 in the guard rotation. Not an army, but enough to matter if things went wrong. When the sun started its descent, Kieran led her to a private audience chamber Lyanna had never been allowed to enter before. Kaelor's personal study, where he handled sensitive matters away from the formal throne room. The door opened and she stepped inside. Kaelor was standing by the window, silhouetted against the dying light. He turned when he heard footsteps, and Lyanna watched his entire body go rigid with shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just stared across the room at each other, 2 people who used to share everything now separated by choices that couldn't be unmade. He looked older, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. His shoulders carried tension like physical weight. The powerful Alpha King who'd condemned her to death looked exhausted. "Lyanna," he said finally. His voice cracked on her name. "Your Majesty?" She kept her tone neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. You're alive." The words came out somewhere between accusation and relief. "They said you died in Black Hollow, that no one could survive what I sent you into. They were wrong." Kaelor took a step toward her, then stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. "How? How did you survive?" "I learned to adapt." Lyanna's smile was sharp. "Turns out when you strip everything away from someone, they either break or they become something you can't predict. I chose the second option." His hands were shaking. She could see it even from across the room. "I thought about you every single day, wondering if you were suffering, if you hated me, if you were even still breathing, and yet you never came to find out, because I couldn't. The prophecy, Seraphine's safety, the stability of the Empire, I had to choose. You chose wrong." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Maybe, probably, but I made the choice I thought would save the most lives, by sacrificing mine. You're still alive. No, thanks to you." Lyanna moved closer and she saw him tense. "I survived because people you've spent generations trying to erase decided I was worth saving. The Ashfang clan, the bloodlines your family tried to wipe from history, they gave me what you never could, the truth about what I am." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "The Crimson Wolf bloodline. Kieran mentioned you'd awakened something. Awakened, embraced, weaponized. Take your pick." Lyanna let some of the heat show in her eyes, that crimson glow that marked her as different. "I'm not the Luna you threw away anymore. I'm something your ancestors feared enough to commit genocide over." Kaelor's face went pale. "Are you here for revenge?" "I'm here because your empire is falling apart, and your brother thinks I'm the only one who can help hold it together. Whether I actually do that depends on what you tell me in the next 5 minutes. What do you want to know?" "Everything. Starting with Seraphine and this prophecy that was convenient enough to justify destroying us." Kaelor moved to his desk and pulled out a leather journal. His hands were still shaking as he opened it to a marked page. "The prophecy appeared 3 months before I met you, delivered by a seer who'd never been wrong in 40 years of service. It said the king's beloved would die by violence unless the fated bond was severed before the next winter." Lyanna watched his face as he spoke. "I didn't want to believe it, spent weeks trying to find another interpretation. But every scholar I consulted said the same thing, your death or Seraphine's. Those were the options. So you chose hers. I chose to save the person I could actually protect. You were strong, trained, capable of surviving almost anything. Seraphine was fragile, innocent. She would have died if anyone came after her. Did it ever occur to you the prophecy might be a lie? That someone might have paid that seer to give you exactly the answer they wanted?" Kaelor's expression shifted. "Of course I considered it, but I couldn't risk being wrong. If there was even a chance the prophecy was real and I ignored it, Seraphine would die and it would be my fault. So better my death on your conscience than hers." "Yes." He met her eyes. "I made a choice, A terrible one. But I made it, and I have to live with the consequences. Lyanna felt the heat in her chest surge with anger. Where is she now? Your precious beloved you sacrificed everything to protect. In her chambers. She's been unwell lately. Headaches and exhaustion. How convenient. Lyanna moved to the window looking out over the city. Has it occurred to you that someone who's supposedly so fragile has been remarkably healthy while building political alliances behind your back? What are you talking about? Your brother didn't tell you. Seraphine has been meeting with Lord Heron and several other council members. Moving money. Consolidating power. And unless I'm very wrong, she's about to make a move that'll destroy everything you've been trying to hold together. That's impossible. She wouldn't she? Lyanna turned back to face him. You barely know her, Kaelor. You know the version of herself she shows you. The soft, delicate girl who needs protection. But people are never just one thing, and the girl you think you're saving might be the one who's been engineering this entire collapse from the beginning. Before Kaelor could respond, the door burst open. Seraphine stood in the doorway, and she looked nothing like the fragile beloved anymore. Her eyes were cold and calculating, her posture was straight and strong, and she was flanked by 6 guards wearing colors that didn't belong to any house Lyanna recognized. Well, Seraphine said quietly, this is unfortunate timing. Kaelor stepped forward. Seraphine, what's going on? Who are these men? That's he. My insurance policy. She gestured and the guards moved into the room, cutting off the exits. I'd hoped to have a few more weeks to finalize everything, but apparently your dead Luna isn't quite as dead as we planned. Kaelor's voice was hollow. What do you mean, we? The prophecy was mine, Your Majesty. Paid for with gold from houses that wanted to see the mate bond broken and your authority weakened. Seraphine's smile was sharp. You were so easy to manipulate. All I had to do was play helpless and watch you destroy yourself trying to save me. Why? Because you were in the way. Your bloodline has held power for too long. The noble houses are tired of bowing to alphas who think strength gives them the right to rule forever. She moved closer. I was supposed to be your weakness, the soft spot that would make you vulnerable. And you played your part perfectly. Lyanna watched Kaelor's face cycle through shock, betrayal, and fury. This was the moment. The point where everything he'd built his choices on revealed itself as foundation made of lies. Guards, Seraphine said calmly. Kill them both. Make it look like the exiled Luna came back for revenge and the king died defending himself. Clean, simple. No one will question it. The guards drew weapons and advanced. Lyanna's hand went to her blade, and the heat in her chest exploded outward like a dam breaking. This was what she'd trained for. Not ceremony or politics or playing games of alliance. This was survival, pure and simple, and she'd learned to be very good at it. The first guard died before his sword cleared its sheath. Lyanna moved like water turned to steel, blade finding the gap between helmet and gorget with surgical precision. The man dropped choking on his own blood, and she was already moving to the next target before his body hit the floor. The heat in her chest wasn't just warmth anymore. It was fire that turned her muscles into something beyond human limitation, that sharpened her senses until she could track the microscopic shift of weight that telegraphed an attack before conscious thought registered it. 6 months of brutal training under Riva's unforgiving eye had rebuilt her into something designed for exactly this kind of violence. And right now, violence was the only language that mattered. The second guard came in high, sword aimed for her throat. She ducked under the strike and drove her blade up through his armpit, where the armor plates didn't quite meet. Felt the resistance of muscle and bone, then the giving way as steel found vital organs. Twisted the blade and pulled it free in one smooth motion, while her other hand caught his falling sword and threw it across the room into the face of a third guard. 3 down in as many heartbeats. Kaelor was moving now too, the shock of Seraphine's betrayal burning away under the immediate necessity of survival. He grabbed a ceremonial sword from the wall display and met the fourth guard's charge, with the kind of raw strength that came from a lifetime of alpha dominance. Their blades crashed together hard enough to send sparks flying. The fifth and sixth guards split their attention, uncertain whether to focus on the exiled Luna, who was cutting through their formation like a scythe through wheat, or the Alpha King, who was holding his own, despite being caught completely off guard. That hesitation cost them. Lyanna feinted toward one, drew his blade out of position, then pivoted and opened the other's throat in a spray of arterial blood. The first guard realized his mistake too late. She was inside his reach before he could recover, driving her knee into his groin hard enough to lift him off his feet, then finishing him with a horizontal slash that nearly took his head off. 6 guards down in less than 20 seconds. Seraphine hadn't moved from the doorway. Just watched the carnage with the kind of detached interest someone might show observing an interesting insect. When the last body hit the floor, she actually smiled. "Impressive," she said. "I can see why Kaelor was so reluctant to kill you properly the first time. You're much more dangerous than you look." Lyanna's blade was dripping red. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. The heat in her chest was still burning hot, demanding more targets, more violence, more proof that she was the apex predator in any room she entered. This was what her bloodline had made her, not just a warrior, a force of destruction wrapped in human skin. And she was starting to understand why Kaelor's ancestors had been so desperate to erase her kind from existence. "You should have stayed dead," Seraphine continued. "Would have made everything so much simpler. But I suppose some people just don't know when to accept their fate." Kaelor stepped forward, sword still in hand. His face was a mask of controlled fury, the kind of rage that came from realizing you'd been played like a fool by someone you trusted. "Everything you said was a lie. Every moment we shared. Every promise you made." "Not every promise. I did promise to change the Empire. I just never said how." Seraphine's smile widened. "You were supposed to be the tragic king who died defending his beloved from a vengeful Luna. Your brother would take the throne, and I would guide him as his grieving almost queen. The noble houses I've allied with would support the transition in exchange for concessions that weaken Alpha authority. Within a generation, the entire power structure shifts away from bloodline dominance and towards something more democratic. You murdered 12 people tonight for politics. I secured a better future for thousands. The math isn't complicated, Kaelor." Lyanna moved to stand beside Kaelor, blade still ready. "You're not walking out of this room." "Actually, I am." Seraphine gestured, and more guards poured through the doorway. 20 at least, maybe 30. These ones wore the colors of House Heron and 2 other noble families. "You killed my disposable insurance. These are the real investment. Trained soldiers loyal to gold and the promise of power redistribution. They'll cut you both down, and tomorrow morning the Empire wakes up to news of a terrible tragedy." The guards fanned out, surrounding them in a tightening circle. Professional formation. No gaps. No obvious weaknesses. Lyanna's mind raced through tactical calculations. 2 against 30 wasn't impossible if you had the right terrain and could control the engagement, but this room was open space with limited exits and opponents who knew what they were doing. They needed an advantage. The heat in her chest pulsed, and she remembered something Riva had taught her about bloodline abilities. Most of what a Crimson Wolf could do was internal enhancement. Strength, speed, durability beyond normal limits. But the really powerful ones, the ones who'd earned the dynasty's reputation, could push that heat outward, could weaponize it. She'd never tried, never had reason to. The concept was theoretical, something mentioned in passing during training. But theory was all she had right now, and the alternative was dying in this room after coming so far. She reached for the heat, not just pulling it through her body, but gathering it, condensing it, preparing to release it like a dam breaking. Kaelor glanced at her, saw something in her expression. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Get behind me." "What? Now?" He moved on instinct to putting himself at her back. The guards tensed, recognizing the shift in posture that meant something was coming. Lyanna let the heat explode outward. It wasn't fire exactly, more like reality bending around concentrated will, the air itself becoming a weapon as crimson energy erupted from her body in a concussive wave. Guards within 10 feet were thrown backward like they'd been hit by a battering ram. Farther ones staggered, armor suddenly too hot to touch, weapons clattering from burned hands. The wave passed, and Lyanna dropped to one knee, vision swimming. The effort had cost her. Felt like she'd just run 10 miles at full sprint while bleeding from major arteries. Her body was screaming that she'd pushed too hard too fast, that bloodline abilities had limits she'd just exceeded by a significant margin. But the guards were down. Most of them anyway. And the ones still standing were hurt and disoriented. Kaelor was moving before the crimson light fully faded, sword finding throats and hearts with brutal efficiency. He might have been blindsided by Seraphine's conspiracy, but he was still an Alpha King who'd spent decades maintaining power through violence when necessary. That skill set didn't just disappear because your heart got broken. Lyanna forced herself back to her feet. Her legs felt like water, but they held. Two guards were recovering faster than the others, coming at her from opposite sides. She met the first with her blade, caught his sword on hers, and used his momentum to throw him into his companion. They went down tangled together, and she finished them both with quick strikes that efficiency demanded, even if mercy might have questioned. There was no room for mercy here, no space for anything except the cold mathematics of survival. Either she killed everyone in this room, or she died. Those were the options. She chose the first one. The fight devolved into chaos, blood on marble floors making footing treacherous, the smell of death mixing with expensive perfume and ceremonial incense. Lyanna and Kaelor fought back to back, covering each other's weak points the way they used to during training sessions that felt like they'd happened in another lifetime. Her blade found flesh again and again. Her body moved through forms Riva had beaten into her muscle memory until they were more instinct than conscious choice. Duck, pivot, strike, withdraw. Never stay in one place. Never commit to an attack unless you're certain of the kill. Never assume an opponent is down until you've confirmed they're not getting back up. The heat in her chest was burning lower now, reserves depleting with every enhancement she called on. She could feel the edge approaching where her bloodline would have nothing left to give, and she'd be running on training and desperation alone. But the guards were thinning. 20 had become 15. 15 became 10. Kaelor took a blade across his ribs, shallow but bleeding. He didn't slow down, just adjusted his stance to protect the wound and kept fighting. An Alpha King didn't survive decades of court intrigue by being soft, didn't hold a throne by backing down when circumstances turned ugly. 5 guards left, then 3. The last one made the mistake of trying to run. Lyanna's throwing knife caught him in the spine before he made it to the door. He went down hard and didn't move again. Silence fell over the room like a burial shroud. 36 bodies littered the floor. Blood was everywhere. The pristine study where Kaelor handled sensitive imperial business looked like an abattoir. And Seraphine was gone. Must have slipped out during the fight, Kaelor said. His voice was rough. We need to find her before she rallies more support. Lyanna was already moving toward the door. We need to find her before she spins a story that makes us the villains. She's got houses backing her, resources, a conspiracy that's been months in the making. If she gets to the nobles first and claims we attacked her unprovoked, this whole empire fractures along fault lines we can't predict. She opened the door and nearly ran into Kieran. Kaelor's brother stood in the hallway with blood on his clothes and a sword in his hand. Behind him, 3 more bodies wearing heron colors decorated the marble. Seraphine ran, he said without preamble, heading toward the great hall with a dozen guards. She's calling for an emergency council session. Claims you've both been corrupted by dark magic and tried to assassinate her. Of course she is. Lyanna's grip tightened on her blade. How long before the council assembles? They're already gathering. Every noble in the capital who matters will be there within the hour. She's going to tell them her version of events, show them her injuries, and call for your immediate execution. Then we go there first. Lyanna started down the hall. We tell them the truth before she can poison it. They won't believe you over her. Kieran fell into step beside them. You're the exiled Luna who's supposed to be dead. She's the beloved victim who's been playing her part perfectly for months. Her word carries more weight right now, so we bring proof. Kaelor's voice was hard. Financial records, correspondence, something that ties her to the conspiracy. There isn't time to gather proof. We have maybe 20 minutes before that council session starts. Lyanna's mind was racing through options and discarding them just as fast. Proof took time they didn't have. Running meant abandoning the empire to Seraphine's manipulation. Fighting their way through the entire noble council was tactically impossible no matter what her bloodline could do, which left one option. The people, she said quietly. Kaelor glanced at her. What? Seraphine's playing to the nobles because that's where political power lives. But there's another power structure she can't control as easily. The common people. The ones who've been watching this empire grind them down for generations. She turned to face both brothers. We bypass the council entirely. We go to the people and we tell them everything. That's insane. Kieran's expression was incredulous. You can't just walk into a crowded square and start making accusations against a noble lady. Why not? Lyanna's voice was sharp. She's betting everything on controlling the narrative through official channels. We don't play on her field. We change the game entirely. And say what exactly? Hello, citizens. The king's beloved is actually a traitor, but trust us because we said so. We show them. Lyanna gestured at Kaelor's bleeding side, at her own blood-soaked clothes, at the bodies visible through the open door of the study. We show them what she was willing to do. We bring them into the throne room where the real power sits, and we force the nobles to answer questions in front of an audience that outnumbers them 1,000 to 1. Kaelor was staring at her like he was seeing someone completely new. You want to weaponize the people against their own ruling class. I want to give them a choice about who rules them. Right now they think they don't have one. We show them different. That could trigger a full revolution. Everything could collapse. It's already collapsing. Seraphine made sure of that. We just decide whether it falls into her hands or into something better. The heat in Lyanna's chest pulsed weakly. She was running on fumes now, bloodline reserves almost completely depleted. But her mind was sharp with the kind of clarity that only came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that came after. They could play by the rules of a system designed to protect people like Seraphine, could try to win through official channels and political maneuvering, or they could burn the entire structure down and build something new from the ashes. Kieran looked between them. If you do this, there's no going back. The Empire as we know it ends tonight. Good. Lyanna's voice was steady. It should have ended decades ago. Kaelor was quiet for a long moment. His hand went to his bleeding side, pressed against the wound. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision they knew would haunt them forever. The main square. We gather everyone we can. Nobles, commons, guards, merchants, everyone. And we expose this conspiracy in front of the entire capital. And if Seraphine fights back, then we fight. Lyanna met his eyes. But this time, we fight for something that matters instead of just survival. They moved through the palace halls like wolves hunting. Kieran sent runners ahead to spread word through the lower city. Emergency gathering in the main square. King's command. Attendance not optional. The Ashfang operatives embedded in the palace staff materialized from shadows, weapons appearing from beneath servants' clothes. Not many, but enough to matter if things turned violent again. By the time they reached the palace's main gates, a crowd was already forming. Confused citizens wondering what emergency could demand assembly at this hour. Guards trying to maintain order while clearly uncertain about what they were supposed to be maintaining order for. Lyanna scanned the growing mass of people and felt something shift in her chest. Not the heat this time. Something deeper, more fundamental. These were the people the Empire had forgotten. The ones who paid taxes they couldn't afford and sent children to wars they didn't start and died in plagues while nobles argued about proper mourning protocols. They deserved better than Seraphine's version of reform, deserved better than Kaelor's version of stability, deserved the chance to decide for themselves what came next. The crowd continued to swell, thousands now, packed into the square shoulder to shoulder, torchlight turning their faces into a sea of expectation and uncertainty. Seraphine appeared on the steps of the council hall across the square, flanked by Lord Heron and a dozen other nobles. Her dress was torn strategically, face marked with cosmetic bruises that looked worse than they were. She was playing the victim perfectly. When she saw Lyanna and Kaelor at the palace gates, something flickered across her expression. Not fear. Calculation. Adjusting her strategy in real time to account for an unexpected variable. Citizens of the Empire, she called out, voice carrying across the square with practiced projection. I come before you tonight bearing terrible news. The Luna you believed was exiled for treason has returned, corrupted by dark powers. She attacked His Majesty with intent to kill, and only the sacrifice of loyal guards prevented a successful assassination. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Confusion, suspicion, people trying to figure out which version of reality to believe. Kaelor stepped forward to the edge of the palace platform. His voice was rough but strong, carrying alpha command that made people instinctively pay attention. She's lying. The assassination attempt was hers. The conspiracy runs through half the noble houses present on those steps. And I can prove it. You can prove nothing, Lord Heron shouted. You stand there covered in the blood of loyal soldiers, and you dare accuse us. I accuse you of treason, of manipulating prophecies, of engineering a conspiracy designed to fracture this empire for personal gain. Kaelor's eyes swept across the nobles. And I'm done playing by rules that let people like you hide behind political immunity while others suffer. The crowd was getting louder, arguments breaking out in the packed mass of bodies, guards shifting nervously, hands on weapons but clearly uncertain who they were supposed to be protecting. Lyanna felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word and it would tip into violence that would consume everyone. One right word and it might tip towards something better. She stepped up beside Kaelor and let the last reserves of her bloodline heat flare in her eyes. Crimson light that marked her as something the Empire thought was extinct. My name is Lyanna Frost, she said, voice carrying through the square. I am the last Crimson Wolf, the bloodline your rulers tried to erase because they feared what we represented. I was exiled to die in Black Hollow for crimes I didn't commit, by a king who chose political convenience over sacred bonds. She paused, letting that sink in, letting the crowd see what she was. I survived. I trained. I became what I was always meant to be. And I came back tonight not for revenge, but to offer you something this empire has never given you. A choice. What choice? Someone shouted from the crowd. The choice to decide who rules you. To tear down a system built on bloodline supremacy and noble privilege. To build something where power comes from the people instead of being taken from them. Lyanna's voice grew stronger. Seraphine's conspiracy would have replaced one form of tyranny with another. Kaelor's empire, for all its stability, still grinds you beneath its weight. I'm offering a third path. And what path is that? Seraphine called out. Mob rule, chaos. Everything this empire has spent centuries preventing. I'm offering them the same thing I claimed for myself. The right to define their own worth instead of having it assigned by people who profit from keeping them small. Lyanna looked out over the crowd. You've spent your lives being told what to think, how to behave, where you fit in the grand order. I'm telling you the order is broken, has been for generations. And you have the power to fix it if you're brave enough to try. The square had gone quiet. Thousands of people processing an offer that should have been impossible. Kaelor stepped closer to the edge. Whatever comes next, it has to be different than what came before. I won't stand here and defend every choice the Empire made. Won't pretend the system is just because it's traditional. He looked directly at the nobles on the council steps. But I will say this. Anyone who conspired with Seraphine to fracture this empire for personal gain, anyone who prioritized their power over the welfare of the people they're supposed to serve, your time is over. You can't make that decision alone, Lord Heron shouted. You're right. Kaelor's voice was hard. So let's put it to the people you claim to represent, every person in this square. You want to keep the empire as it is, with noble houses holding power and the rest of you hoping for scraps? Or you want to tear it down and build something that serves everyone instead of just the ones at the top? The crowd erupted. Arguments, shouts. People who'd never been asked their opinion suddenly confronted with actual choice. Seraphine's expression went cold. She gestured to the guards around her. The people don't get to decide. That's not how empires work. The guards moved forward, weapons drawn, heading toward the palace platform. Lyanna's hand went to her blade. The heat in her chest was almost completely depleted, but her training was still sharp. If this came down to fighting, she'd make every strike count until her body gave out. But then something unexpected happened. The guards stopped. Not all of them, but enough. Men and women who'd spent their lives following orders suddenly looking at those orders and questioning whether they made sense. One guard, young man maybe 25, dropped his sword. It clattered on the marble steps loud enough to echo. Then another, and another. Within seconds, half the guards on the council steps had disarmed themselves, standing there in defiance of direct commands from their noble employers. I'm done, one of them said. Done fighting for people who treat us like disposable tools. Done pretending this system works. The remaining nobles looked at each other in growing panic as the crowd surged forward. Not violent, not yet, but the balance of power was shifting visibly, undeniably, right there in the square. Seraphine backed toward the council hall entrance. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Lyanna's voice cut through the noise. Your conspiracy failed. Your guards abandoned you. And the empire you tried to control is choosing something different, Seraphine's mask finally cracked, fury and desperation breaking through the carefully maintained victim persona. Then I'll burn it all down myself. She pulled something from her dress. Small vial, contents dark and viscous. You want to see what real power looks like? Watch. She smashed the vial on the marble steps, and black smoke erupted outward, spreading faster than anything natural should move. The crowd closest to the council hall started screaming, backing away from smoke that smelled like corruption and old magic. Lyanna felt her blood go cold. She'd read about this in the Ashfang archives. Forbidden alchemy that weaponized plague and madness. The kind of thing that could turn a crowded square into a death trap in minutes. Seraphine had brought a failsafe. If she couldn't control the Empire, she'd poison it. The smoke spread across the square like a living thing, reaching for the packed mass of people who had nowhere to run. And Lyanna realized with perfect clarity that the only way to stop it was to contain it, to pull it into herself before it could reach anyone else. The heat in her chest was almost gone. Barely an ember left, but her bloodline had one last gift if she was willing to pay the price. Crimson wolves could absorb corruption, could pull poison and plague into their own bodies and burn it away with pure concentrated will. It would probably kill her. The archives had been very clear about that part, but it would save everyone else. She looked at Kaelor, saw him realize what she was about to do, saw him start to move toward her, to stop her. Too slow. Lyanna reached for the last ember of heat in her chest and pulled the black smoke toward herself with everything she had left, her body becoming the container that would either purify the corruption or be destroyed trying. And the square erupted into chaos as crimson light and black smoke collided in an explosion of power that made reality itself scream. Pain was the first thing that came back. Not the clean, sharp pain of a blade or the dull ache of bruised muscle. This was something deeper, cellular, like every part of her body was being simultaneously torn apart and stitched back together by hands that didn't care if the process destroyed her in the making. Lyanna's eyes opened to crimson light bleeding through her closed eyelids. She could feel the black smoke inside her, writhing like something alive and malevolent, trying to corrupt everything it touched. Her bloodline heat was fighting it, burning through the poison molecule by molecule, but the cost was staggering. She was dying, could feel it happening in real time, her heart struggling to maintain rhythm, her lungs forgetting how to process air, her consciousness fragmenting into pieces that didn't quite fit together anymore. This was what the archives had warned about. What happened when a crimson wolf tried to purify corruption beyond their capacity to contain. The bloodline would consume itself trying to save what it touched, and the host would burn away to nothing in the process. At least everyone else would live. That thought should have brought comfort, should have made the sacrifice worthwhile. But all Lyanna felt was a bone-deep exhaustion and the bitter knowledge that she'd survived so much only to die saving an empire that had tried to kill her first. The universe had a vicious sense of irony. Then someone's hands were on her face. Warm, steady, familiar in a way that reached past the pain and the poison. Stay with me. Kaelor's voice cut through the chaos in her head. Don't you dare leave now, not after everything. She tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. The corruption was spreading through her faster now, racing against the bloodline heat that was rapidly depleting. She could feel the moment approaching when there would be nothing left to fight with and the poison would win. Her vision was going gray at the edges, the sounds of the square fading to distant noise. This was it, the final moment, the place where her story ended. Except Kaelor wasn't letting go. His hands moved to her chest, pressing down over her heart, and she felt something flow from him into her. Power. Raw alpha dominance channeled with surgical precision into the place where her bloodline heat was guttering like a candle in a storm. What are you doing? She managed to whisper. Giving you what you need. His voice was strained. A mate bond might be broken, but the connection doesn't just disappear. There's still a thread, still something linking us, and I'm using it. The influx of power was like gasoline thrown on dying embers. Her bloodline heat flared back to life, burning hotter than it ever had, fed by Kaelor's strength in addition to her own. The black smoke inside her started to dissolve faster, purified by fire that now had fuel to sustain itself. But the cost to Kaelor was visible. His face went pale. His hands started shaking. He was pouring everything he had into her, keeping her alive through sheer force of will. You'll kill yourself, she said. Then we die together. Better than watching you burn out alone. The crimson light intensified. Lyanna felt the last of the corruption dissolve under the combined assault of their power. Two bloodlines working in tandem the way they were supposed to when fate bound them together. The black smoke became ash, became nothing, purified completely. The light faded. Lyanna gasped air into lungs that suddenly remembered how to work. Her heart found its rhythm again. The pain was still there, but it was manageable now. Survivable. She was alive. Kaelor collapsed beside her, breathing hard. He'd given so much that his own reserves were completely depleted. Just a man now, instead of an Alpha King radiating dominance. Lyanna turned her head to look at him. They were lying on the marble steps of the palace platform, covered in blood and ash and the residue of power that should have killed them both. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because you were right, about everything." His eyes met hers. "I chose wrong. Broke something sacred because I was afraid. And I've spent every day since then trying to justify a decision I knew was unforgivable. But watching you pull that poison into yourself to save people who did nothing to deserve it, that was the first truly noble thing I've witnessed in this empire in years. I wasn't going to let you die alone for it." The square around them had gone quiet. Thousands of people staring at the two figures on the platform, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Seraphine was gone. Fled during the chaos or buried under rubble from the explosion. Either way, her conspiracy had died with the black smoke. Kieran appeared at the edge of the platform, sword still in hand but expression shell-shocked. "Is it over?" Lyanna pushed herself upright. Every muscle screamed protest, but she forced them to obey. Her gaze swept across the square, taking in the faces of people who'd just been offered a choice and seen what happened when power turned desperate. "No," she said. "It's just starting." She stood, legs unsteady but holding. Kaelor rose beside her, equally shaky but refusing to show weakness in front of the empire that was watching. Lyanna looked out over the crowd and saw the question in their eyes. What happens now? Who leads? What comes after everything they knew got torn down in one brutal night? The nobles who'd supported Seraphine were being rounded up by guards who'd chosen differently. Lord Heron was on his knees with a blade at his throat. Others were trying to disappear into the crowd and failing. The old order was collapsing in real time. And something new had to rise in its place, or the vacuum would consume everything. Lyanna took a breath and felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The exile, the training, the awakening of a bloodline that had been sleeping for generations. She'd survived all of it for a reason. Not to claim a throne, not to rule an empire the same way it had always been ruled, but to break the cycle completely. She turned to Kaelor. "Your empire is dying. You can feel it. Everyone can. The question is what you build from the ashes. What would you build? Something that doesn't require people to break sacred bonds to maintain stability. Something where power comes from consent instead of birthright. Where the people in this square have actual say in who governs them and how." Her voice grew stronger. "You want to save the empire? Fine. Save it by transforming it into something worth saving. That's asking me to give up everything my bloodline built. Your bloodline built a system that required genocide to maintain. That crushed the Crimson Wolves because we represented a threat to absolute authority. Is that really worth preserving?" Kaelor was quiet for a long moment. The square waited. An entire empire balanced on whatever he said next. "No," he said finally. "It's not." He stepped forward to address the crowd directly. His voice carried the remnants of Alpha Command, but there was something different underneath, something closer to humility than dominance. What you witnessed tonight was the culmination of failures that have been building for generations. My failure to honor sacred bonds. The noble house's failure to serve anything beyond their own interests. The empire's failure to protect the people it was supposed to nurture. He paused. I can't undo those failures. Can't bring back the lives lost or repair the trust broken. But I can choose differently going forward. The crowd was listening. Really listening. Not out of fear or obligation, but because for once a king was speaking to them like they mattered. The old empire ends tonight. What comes next will be built together, not decreed from a throne, not manipulated by noble conspiracies, built by every person in this square who has a stake in whether we survive or collapse. Kaelor's gaze swept across the sea of faces. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to hold me accountable, to demand better and refuse to accept anything less. A woman near the front of the crowd spoke up. Her voice was rough with decades of hard living. What about her? She pointed at Lyanna. The Luna you threw away. What happens to her? Lyanna stepped forward before Kaelor could answer. I'm not Luna anymore. That title belonged to a woman who believed the system could be fixed from within if she just worked hard enough and followed the rules. She died in Black Hollow. What came back is something different. Then what are you? Lyanna let the crimson light show in her eyes, a reminder of what her bloodline represented. I'm a survivor, a crimson wolf. The last of a bloodline that was erased because it challenged the idea that some people are born to rule and others born to serve. And I'm here to make sure that erasure never happens again. To anyone. The square erupted in noise, arguments and questions and demands. People who'd lived their entire lives under one system suddenly confronted with the possibility of something different. It took hours to restore order. Hours of negotiation and shouting and the slow, painful process of people who'd never had power learning how to claim it. The sun was rising by the time a framework started to emerge. The noble houses that had conspired with Seraphine would be dissolved, their lands and resources redistributed. The remaining houses would keep titles but lose absolute authority. A council would be formed, half nobles and half commons, with actual power to make laws and override the king's decisions. Kaelor would remain as Alpha King, but he'd govern by consent instead of dominance. And if he failed to serve the people, they'd have mechanisms to remove him that didn't require violence. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even particularly clean, but it was a foundation that could be built on instead of another structure designed to crush anyone who questioned it. Lyanna stood apart from the negotiations, watching the empire remake itself in real time. She'd done what she came to do. Exposed the conspiracy, prevented Seraphine's coup, offered the people a choice. Now they had to decide what to do with it. Riva found her as dawn painted the square in shades of gold and blood. The Ashfang warrior looked at the chaos and smiled grimly. You actually did it. Tore down an empire with nothing but stubbornness and a bloodline that refused to stay dead. Is that approval I'm hearing? It's acknowledgement. You chose the harder path. Would have been easier to just burn it all down and walk away. Instead, you're giving them a chance to be better. Do you think they'll take it? Riva shrugged. Some will, some won't. But at least now they get to decide for themselves instead of having their fates assigned by people who profit from their suffering. That's worth something. Lyanna thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. The Luna who'd stood in a throne room and accepted exile because she still believed the system would protect her if she just played by the rules hard enough. That woman seemed impossibly naive now, a ghost of someone who'd never learned that the rules were designed to protect the powerful and contain everyone else. But maybe that innocence had been necessary. Maybe she'd needed to believe in something before she could learn to question it, to trust before she understood betrayal, to love before she learned that love wasn't always enough to overcome fear. Kaelor approached as Riva melted back into the crowd. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, like he'd aged a decade overnight. The council's drafting terms, he said, drawing up agreements. It's going to take months to implement everything. Maybe years. Good. Things worth building take time. They stood together in silence, watching the square slowly empty as people dispersed to process what had happened. The bodies had been removed. The blood washed away. But the memory of this night would linger in the Empire's bones for generations. I owe you an apology, Kaelor said quietly, for the exile, for choosing fear over faith, for every moment of suffering I caused because I was too weak to make the right choice. Lyanna considered the words, waited to feel anger or vindication or some satisfaction that he'd finally acknowledged what he'd done. Instead, she just felt tired. Your apology doesn't change what happened, doesn't undo the months I spent surviving in conditions that should have killed me, doesn't restore the bond you broke or the trust you destroyed. I know, but it's a start. She looked at him fully. You made a terrible choice based on incomplete information and manipulation you didn't recognize until too late. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. An explanation is the first step toward actually changing instead of just regretting. What happens now? Between us. Lyanna thought about the mate bond that used to connect them. The invisible thread that had been severed but left ghost traces, connections that didn't just disappear because someone declared them void. When Kaelor had poured his power into her to save her from the corruption, she'd felt it. That old bond trying to reform, reaching across the gap like roots seeking water. But she'd also felt how different it was now. Not the overwhelming pull of fated connection that bypassed choice. Something quieter. More deliberate. The bond you broke can't be restored, she said. It was sacred because it was given freely and honored completely. You violated that. Made it conditional. Turned something meant to be unbreakable into just another political calculation. Kaelor's expression was stricken, but he didn't argue. Didn't try to make excuses. But bonds aren't the only way people connect, Lyanna continued. Sometimes they're just the starting point. The framework that gets you in the same room. What you build from there is choice. Effort. The daily decision to show up even when it's hard. Are you saying there's a chance? I'm saying I don't know yet. Right now I'm focused on making sure this empire doesn't collapse into civil war before the new council even meets. Everything else is secondary. And after that, we see who we are when we're not running from conspiracies or fighting for survival. See if the people we've become can actually exist in the same space without destroying each other. That's not a yes. It's not a no either. Lyanna's voice softened slightly. You hurt me worse than anyone ever has. Made me question my worth and my judgment and whether I was ever anything more than an obstacle to be removed. That damage doesn't heal overnight just because you apologized and helped save my life. I understand, but I also saw you stand in front of your empire and admit you were wrong. Saw you offer to dismantle a power structure your bloodline built because it was the right thing to do. That takes a different kind of strength than just ruling through dominance. She paused. So maybe there's something worth exploring, eventually, when we're both less broken. Kaelor's hand moved like he was going to reach for her, then stopped. Can I at least know what you're planning to do now? The Ashvine clan wants me to stay with them, help integrate the hidden tribes back into the Empire's framework now that they don't have to hide anymore. Lyanna looked toward the northern mountains barely visible on the horizon. And I need to learn more about what it means to be a Crimson Wolf. What responsibilities come with this bloodline beyond just survival? You're leaving, for a while. This empire needs to find its footing without me looming over every decision. And I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being someone's mate or someone's victim or someone's threat. How long? As long as it takes. Lyanna turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Seraphine, if she survived, if she's out there planning another conspiracy, I want to know about it. She nearly destroyed everything tonight. That doesn't just get forgotten. I'll have people searching. Kaelor's voice was firm. If she's alive, we'll find her. Good. Because next time she tries something like this, I won't pull the poison into myself. I'll let it consume her and everyone who helped her. The threat hung in the air like a promise. Kaelor nodded slowly. Understood. Lyanna walked away from the palace as the sun climbed higher, painting the capital in golden light that made the blood and ash from the night almost invisible. Behind her, the empire was tearing itself apart and rebuilding simultaneously. Ahead of her, the northern territories waited with lessons and legacies she'd barely begun to understand. She'd survived exile and awakening, and conspiracy and corruption, had gone from discarded mate to force of nature in the span of months. But the real transformation was deeper than power or bloodline or even survival. She'd learned that strength wasn't about dominating others or refusing to break. It was about breaking completely and choosing to put yourself back together in a shape that fit who you wanted to be instead of who others expected. She'd learned that betrayal didn't make you weak. It made you informed, gave you the knowledge to recognize manipulation before it could sink hooks too deep. She'd learned that love, real love, had to be built on foundations stronger than fate or prophecy or convenience, had to be chosen daily, earned constantly, protected fiercely. And she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was walk away from something you'd spent your whole life believing you needed and trust that you'd survive the absence. The capital gates were open. Beyond them, the road stretched north toward mountains and forests and territories that had never bowed to empire rule. Lyanna took one last look back at the city that had been her home, her prison, her battleground. Then she walked through the gates and didn't look back again. 6 months later, reports started filtering back to the capital about a settlement in the Northern Territories, a place where the hidden clans were gathering openly for the first time in centuries, where Crimson Wolf banners flew alongside Ashfang markers and a dozen other bloodlines that history had tried to erase. They called it Frost Haven, and they said it was ruled by a woman who died in the snow and come back as something legends were built on. Kaelor read the reports in his study, the same room where Seraphine's conspiracy had been exposed. The Empire was stabilizing slowly. The Council was finding its rhythm. The people were learning how to demand accountability instead of just accepting whatever they were given. It was messy, often frustrating. Sometimes it felt like 3 steps backward for every 2 forward, but it was better than what came before. He kept one report separate from the others. A personal message delivered by an Ashfang courier who'd refused to say where it came from. The note was brief. 3 sentences in handwriting he recognized immediately. The Empire survived its reformation. That's worth something. Maybe when enough time has passed, we'll talk about what comes next. No signature, no promises. But it was more than he deserved, and he knew it. Kaelor placed the note in a locked drawer alongside other reminders of choices that couldn't be unmade but could be learned from. Then he returned to the stack of council proposals and the slow grinding work of governing an empire that was finally, painfully, learning to serve its people instead of ruling them. In the Northern Territories, Lyanna stood on a ridge overlooking Frosthaven and watched smoke rise from cooking fires in the settlement below. The Ashfang clan had integrated smoothly with the other bloodlines. Children who'd never known safety were playing in open streets. Elders who'd spent decades hiding were teaching history that had been systematically erased. It wasn't perfect. There were disputes and challenges and the constant low-level friction of different cultures learning to coexist. But it was theirs, built by choice instead of conquest, maintained by consensus instead of domination. Riva climbed the ridge to stand beside her. The older warrior had been appointed as Frosthaven's military commander, a role she filled with the same brutal efficiency she applied to everything. "Council's asking when you're going to make it official," Riva said. "Make what official?" "Your leadership. Right now, you're just the woman everyone looks to for decisions. They want to formalize it, give you a title, make it clear you're actually in charge." Lyanna shook her head. "Titles are what got us into this mess in the first place. Someone decides they're alpha or king or whatever, and suddenly they think that gives them the right to make choices for everyone else. I don't want that. So what do you want? To be useful. To use what I learned and what I am to help build something that doesn't require people like me to hold it together." Her voice was quiet. The Empire needed an Alpha King because it was built on hierarchy and dominance. We're building something different. It should function differently too. You think you can create a system that doesn't need leaders? I think we can create one where leadership is service instead of privilege, where the people doing the work of governance are accountable to the ones being governed, where power flows upward from consent instead of downward from authority. Reva smiled. "You sound like a revolutionary." "Maybe I am." Lyanna looked out over the settlement. "Or maybe I'm just someone who died in the snow and learned that the old ways don't have to be the only ways." The sun was setting, painting the northern mountains in shades of crimson and gold, the same colors that had marked Lyanna's awakening a year ago. She'd survived exile, betrayal, war, corruption. Had been broken and remade so many times she'd lost count of which version of herself was the original. But she was still here, still standing, still building something that might outlast the woman who started it. And that, she'd learned, was the real measure of strength. Not the ability to dominate or destroy or refuse to bend, but the capacity to break completely, to burn down to ash and embers, and then choose to rise anyway. Not because fate demanded it, not because some prophecy or bloodline or bond compelled it, but because you decided your story didn't end in the snow, and you were willing to do the brutal, exhausting work of writing a different ending. Lyanna Frost had been many things. Luna, exile, survivor, Crimson Wolf. But the title that mattered most was the one she'd claimed for herself in the frozen wasteland when everyone else had written her off as dead. She was someone who refused to stay buried. And in an empire built on bloodlines and prophecies and power passed down through generations of dominance, that single act of defiant survival had been enough to change everything. The north wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and the promise of winter approaching. Lyanna breathed it in and smiled. She'd survived worse.